Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will from StarHearth Astrology. I'm here today to talk about your horoscope for March of 2025. This is the craziest month of astrology for all of 2025. There is so much going on, so I thought it would be really helpful instead of just giving you a general overview to break it down for each sign. You can look in the timestamp, and as always, I strongly suggest that you check out the rising signs of your lovers and your children and your family and your besties so that you can know what they are likely going through at the same time so that we can be kinder and more generous while we're all running around with our chickens with our heads cut off. Because there is so much going on that it's really hard to tell what is going to be the heavy hitters for each individual. So even within rising signs, this is going to be really different. It's going to depend on which annual perfection you're in, who your Lord of the Year is in. We are really dealing with a lot. Not to mention, we are coming off of the heels of the Mars retrograde, which is still very much being integrated. So there is a lot of change happening, a lot of things happening very quickly. The full impact of all of this is not going to be apparent. And in fact, there may be things that happen that you don't even notice, but later on, as they become more important, you will look back to March and be like, wow, that really started then. Wow, we really adjusted this. Because March is really a pivot point from the last 5 years to the next 5 years. And it's going to be a little bit of a bridge. 2025, it's really going to waffle, but a lot of stuff happens in March and just everything goes crazy. And then we're going to be dealing with the craziness of that for, I imagine, the rest of the year. There's other stuff that happens later on in the year, but nothing happens quite in this pile up. We are really in an avalanche. So hopefully I can bring some clarity to that. Okay, I am going to bring up the charts and head into horoscopes per rising sign in zodiacal order, which means that we are starting with Aries. Let's pull. Okay, here we go. We have Aries rising. Her Aries, man, this is such a big month. This is such a big month because really so much of what's happening is the negotiation between your 12th and your first house. And when we are looking at transits really uniting those two, we are talking about these parts of yourself that maybe you have tried to hide or you haven't been totally aware of, that haven't been integrated into the conscious personality. So I think of these houses as like the 12th house is the basement and the first house is the street view of your house. So often when people are doing 12th house transits for a long time, and right, you've had Neptune in your 12th house since 2011, you've had Saturn in your 12th house since 2023. The North Node is in there, so we're not even done. But we're really soul searching and doing this work down deep inside of ourselves to figure out what's happening there. And then when we start doing the first house work, we're integrating those changes in ways that other people can see. And how that looks and how that appears is a big theme of March 2025. So we start off on March 1st with Venus stationing retrograde. You can see she's stationing right there with that little s. On March 1st at 10 degrees. So depending on the degree of your ascendant, it might be before it might be on it. That's really just going to change the volume a little bit on what that's going to look like. She's stationing, she's going to move retrograde. And that's really so much about this appearance, who you're attracting in the world, right? If you found yourself on the wrong side of TikTok, the retrograde is going to be about finding your people again, or maybe withdrawing and taking a break when Venus goes back into Pisces. Because in Pisces, Venus is really asking what her values are, what she's doing for the collective. And Aries rising is so much about being leaders and being these kind of heroes that are willing to say the thing and willing to go out on your own and do the thing. This Venus retrograde in Pisces and even this Mercury retrograde that also goes from Aries to Pisces this month is so much about why. Why is this your mission? Why do you care about this? And if it's not real, if it's not connected to your authentic self, to your mission, to your faith, if it is not in accordance with your unconscious self, then it's probably not the thing. You are allowed to be confused and change your mind about those things. And that's the story of this month. We're coming out of Mars being retrograde in your fourth house. That's really got you analyzing the foundations of your life and what you take care of and what you protect and who you are in that role. Mars is going to move forward again, so things should start moving forward. But sometimes we have to go back to go forward. That Venus and Mercury is really working on the kind of marketing and making sure it is authentic. We will have a Virgo eclipse that happens on March 13th or March 14th, depending on your time zone. And that happens in your sixth house of embodiment. So you want to be checking in on how are you taking care of your body? How are you managing your stamina? That is so important to Aries rising. So are you eating well? Are you working out? Are you doing a kind of daily sustainable practice? And if not, what do you need to do that's actually going to work for you? And that will be mirrored when Mercury stations retrograde on March 14th, because Mercury rules your sixth house as well. So we've got the Venus retrograde and the Mercury retrograde that are prompting these kind of changes and these reflections. On March 29th, we will have our final Aries eclipse. So our final solar eclipse in your first house. And this is, right, again, this is the third of 3 powerful solar Aries eclipses that reset the tone moving forward of who you are in the world and of bringing your mission and sharing it with us. It is going to happen at 9 degrees, that solar eclipse. The Venus stations retrograde at almost 11 degrees. Mercury stations retrograde at 9 degrees. So they are all concentrated right around that area. If your sun is in that area, if you were born right around the end of March and the last few days of March, all of that is happening on your identity. Even if you have other planets there, they are really being shifted and affected by these personal planets and their retrogrades. Finally, at the very end of the month, on March 30th, we are going to have Neptune moving into Aries, where they will be spending the next 12 to 14 years. When Neptune moves into Aries, your self-concept changes. It may be that you had a really solid sense of who you thought you were and what you were doing, and that takes on a little bit more of a mystical and a numinous quality. It can be harder to understand really where your boundaries are and who you are in the context of everything with Neptune right there. But that can also create this kind of more permeable nature for you where you can experience more because you are not just beaming out your image of yourself onto things. So that is exciting. And then later on in the year, we'll at the end of May, we'll also have Saturn moving in there. So you will have both the disillusion of who you thought you were and the concretization of who you are now, and really reaching for a really strong ideal. So lots to come. Okay, next up we have Taurus rising. So for Taurus rising, a big story of the next month is that the ruler of your chart, Venus, is going to be retrograde in your 12th house, which can definitely have you feeling a little bit lost. I don't have a sense of what I want, and I don't have a sense of my intuition in that area, and that is really confusing because that really guides me. And what Venus is doing is she is going retrograde. She's coming back to your 11th house. And really, the guidance there is having you connect with your community, even if you feel a little bit adrift, because that's such a strong value for you. And she's so strongly placed there in your 11th house that you can rely on your connections in that space. And that's really a big theme for this month and for next month. It's totally fine for you to feel overwhelmed by what you're supposed to be doing in the world right now and how to even integrate everything that's happening. And when in doubt, reach out. Other people need you. They need your voice. They need your solid, grounded Taurusness. Even when you feel lost, your standards for feeling lost are like what other people live through on a daily basis. That's the Venus piece. She stations retrograde on March 1st, so this will be active the whole month, and she is going to be retrograde in Aries until the very end of March, until March 27th. For almost the entire month, she is in your 12th house. It is okay if you feel lost. Mercury is going to station retrograde at 9 degrees of Aries on March 14th. So there can also be like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think. I think that sometimes when planets are in our 12th house, they just disappear. They go offline. And part of that is that we need to go into the deep recesses of our aloneness to find them because they're not immediate. So there is this kind of diving deep to harvest the final fruits of what these eclipses and Aries have been about for you, which is really seeing yourself, not just as static, but as very much a creative participant that doesn't exist just for the comfort and safety of others, but also has creativity to contribute to the space and the courage to do that. We have an eclipse in Virgo that happens in your 5th house, in the house of children, the house of sex, the house of pleasure, the house of play, right? And this eclipse happening concurrently, it happens on March 13th or 14th, depending on your time zone. And Mercury stations retrograde on the 14th. So we have the ruler of this lunar eclipse also stationing retrograde. I think those two things will be very connected, right? What happens with the eclipse? Are you missing something in the realm of pleasure and play? Are you missing something in your relationship with your children or your potential children? This eclipse is really illuminating that. And then Mercury moving retrograde is trying to integrate whatever has been illumined. Then we have our final Aries eclipse that happens in your 12th house on March 29th at 9 degrees of Aries. So this happens at the same place that Mercury stationed retrograde and Venus stationed retrograde. So it's very much about, okay, what did we learn there? What are we doing? What is the new way that we can inhabit this space? What do we need to be doing in our 12th house? Neptune enters Aries and will be there for more than a decade after a kind of brief regress into Pisces this fall. Neptune really, there is deepening your experience of connection with the unseen. It is bringing help or lack of help too, in the sense that the 12th house is the place of hidden enemies. Yeah, so that's what we have for Taurus rising. This is not the loudest month for this rising sign. I think for some of you, you'll be really blindsided by some insights coming out of your 12th house because that is the nature of the 12th house. But sometimes the things that come out of the 12th house really affect us internally, but don't affect the outer appearance of our lives as much, and certainly not the biggest story for you. in 2025. Okay. Gemini rising. This month is really about reshuffling work, community, and starting to bring your focus back to home. So all of the Aries stuff that's been going on, all of the Pisces stuff that is going on has been so much about who you are in the public sphere out in the world. And that will continue to be true for March, but the Virgo eclipse that happens mid-month will pull you back towards the home. We are beginning the month on March 1st with Venus stationing retrograde in your 11th house of friends, connections, alliances, hopes, right? This is really what you expect from the world around you, who is on your team, and what you are trying to do. And there might be some instances where you're noticing some things of people that you previously thought you were in alliance with, on the same side with politically or in the community, that then you realize maybe not so much, and you back up and you back off, and you have to reconsider whose mission you align with and who aligns with yours, and really why you're pushing forward the things that you believe. And that really goes back to your 10th house, which is so much about doing the work that you are called to do. Venus in Aries is a very clear idea of what she wants, and she's ready to get it, and it catches people off guard because it's a little bit out of the expectation of Venus. And now there's the sense of walking it back to connect with what you have faith in and what you believe your purpose to be in this world. Venus is going back to Saturn in your 10th and really collecting the lessons of everything that you've learned while Saturn has transited your 10th house for the last 2 years that Neptune has brought to you while Neptune transited your 10th house for the last 14 years. Neptune has been in your 10th house since 2011. And in some ways, that calls you on these holy journeys, but I imagine that the other side of it is that it has really obscured your sense of what your purpose is and what you are supposed to be doing as we kind of waffle back and forth with both Venus and Mercury and Neptune and the nodes, really massaging the boundary between Pisces and Aries. We are asking about who we are as individuals in the context of the collective, and not just the physical or the political collective, but also the spiritual collective and all of the unseen contexts around us. And Venus will station retrograde on the 1st. Then we have a lunar eclipse in your 4th house at 24 degrees of Virgo. And that lunar eclipse on the south node is really calling you home to see what's missing. Have you been forgetting to tend to your home life, to your actual home, right? It's kind of pulling you a little bit inwards to see if maybe you have lost your foundation because you've been doing so much work out in visible spaces that you have confused who you are for how people see you, which is not the same. Just on the heels of that eclipse, not even 24 hours later, Mercury will station retrograde at 9.5 degrees of Aries. So basically at the same place where Venus stationed retrograde. Mercury is the ruler of your chart and the ruler of your 4th house. Mercury is changing up its ideas. It is going between the impulsive words of Aries and into the confused intuitions and creative expression of Pisces. What do I really need to communicate, and who do I need to communicate it to? Who really is my audience. And then they will both conjoin the sun right around the equinox as the sun enters Aries. And there we can expect to get some insight around what they mean. And then we have our final Aries solar eclipse in your 11th house that happens right at 9 degrees of Aries. So again, if you have anything natally around 9 to 11 degrees of Aries or any of the cardinal signs, you can expect that to be very affected by both these retrogrades and also the second eclipse. Finally, on March 30th, Neptune enters Aries for the first time since the Civil War. So none of us have experienced this. Neptune enters Aries and brings a whole new divine meaning and permeability to that space. It can be really finding yourself filled with conviction and in a kind of holy war, or there can be a loss. Wherever Neptune is, things are not quite solid and things are not quite as they seem. So it is important to stay nimble in those spaces. And Gemini is the best at staying nimble. So a really interesting month for you that will set off a bunch of stuff in the year to come as both Neptune and Saturn change signs from Pisces into Aries and then retrograde back in the fall before they both enter Aries again in 2026 permanently. So lots of changes with your community and your friendships. And that can be painful. That can be difficult to navigate, right? With Chiron there, you have been working since 2018 to bring the medicine to that area of your life. And this final Aries solar eclipse offers you the kind of final iteration of medicine as far as eclipses go in that space. Okay. Cancer risings, how are you doing? Did you survive the Mars retrograde in your first house? How is your sense of empowerment? How is your sense of stamina? My goodness, it has been a lot. You guys have definitely been undergoing some of the most intense transits, just as a matter of course. March starts off with Venus stationing retrograde in your 10th house, the place of your life's work. You guys are on a mission to do something and to be seen as the individuals that you are, unafraid to ruffle feathers. This retrograde and the Mercury retrograde that stations in Aries in a couple weeks after have so much to do with the Mars retrograde. Because a Mars retrograde in the first house is really redefining who you are, and Mars rules your 10th house. Mars is the planet that is giving cues of what you are supposed to be doing in the world. When we have both Venus and Mercury stationing retrograde in Mars's sign after Mars is stationed direct, they are figuring out how to integrate and channel the changes that were brought about by the Mars retrograde in Leo and in Cancer. And now the Leo portion of the retrograde took place in your second house of personal finances. And so when it moves direct again and re-enters Leo, we're looking at if your work is really supporting you, not just monetarily, but also with its connection to your first house in who you are. And Venus retrograde can always be about finances in the same way that it can always be about relationships, regardless of where it is. Are you making the money that you need to be making? Is your job in alignment with your values of what you believe in? It retrogrades back into the 9th house and really connects you with your creed in terms of what you believe in how you live out your life principles. On March 13th or 14th, depending on your time zone, we have a lunar eclipse in Virgo, our first Virgo eclipse that is in your third house, that is asking you to reconnect with your neighborhood, with your community, with your family, with your familiars. It is checking out, are you grounded in place? Do you have the village that you need? When we have eclipses, especially lunar eclipses on the south node, we're asking, what is missing in this experience? What is out of balance? And Mercury responds to that immediately. Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, so the ruler of that eclipse. And at the time of the eclipse is stationing retrograde in Aries. How is this reflected in the work that we do and who we are in the world? And that Mercury retrograde that will go from 9.5 degrees of Aries back to 26, almost 27 degrees of Pisces is asking you to infuse those together, both what you do and what you believe and how that shows up, right? And with an eclipse in your third house, it might also be with how you communicate that and how you inspire other people to do that. Finally, we have a final third of 3 solar eclipse in Aries. This is your third. The previous 2 happened on the previous 2 Aprils, starting these new chapters within your life's work. So look for changes there. And then finally, Neptune moves into your 10th house. Neptune, the obscurer, the inspirer, the redemption, moves from the 9th house of watery Pisces, where you're integrating your spirituality and deepening your sense of being connected and involved with the collective, both spiritual and physical. And now it comes into really be your holy mission and your personal crusade in the world. And you have 14 years to figure out what that means as Neptune moves through Aries. Take notes. There's so much going on for Cancer risings. This is definitely hitting your chart in multiple dynamic ways. So good luck out there. Okay. Leo risings for the month of March. Venus is going to station retrograde right on March 1st and will remain retrograde until mid-April, spending the majority of it, almost in all of March, retrograde in Aries. So we have the planet that rules your 3rd house and your 10th house, your familiarity and your career retrograde, and your 9th house of belief systems, higher education, long distance travel, but really like your world map. She is questioning that and sinking back into Pisces. And Pisces is your 8th house. It is the place of deep intimacy with others where you are entangled with others. And Venus, I think she has this questioning between the spontaneity and individualism of Aries and the collective nature of Pisces. And I think her unique journey for Leo risings will be in her connection with Saturn in the 8th house and possibly feeling overburdened by the psychological and debts that she has to other people. We will also have our first Virgo eclipse on March 13th or 14th, depending on your time zone, and that happens at 24 degrees of Virgo. That happens in Leo rising's 2nd house, which has to do with your talents, your resources, what you do to make money. And a lunar eclipse on the south node asks what's missing in that space. And it also asks if there are stories that you have told yourself about that space that are holding you back. What needs to be removed so that you can move forward, so that you can lean into that north node in Pisces? Trust that if you are on the path, you will be carried. clear away some of that need for control or obsessive responsibility taking or resistance to letting anybody else help support you. We're in a much different space than that. At the same time, Mercury, the ruler of that lunar eclipse, will station retrograde, very similar to the degree that Venus stationed retrograde. And this is Mercury reflecting on that eclipse and bringing that into a retrograde motion, which is more contemplative, following the heart with Venus to the mind with Mercury. We will have another eclipse on March 29th that happens at that same degree. So after we have these two retrogrades, these two station points, then we will have an eclipse on that same degree. And hopefully that is a new moon solar eclipse on the North Node, even though the North Node is not in that sign anymore. This is your kind of culminating Aries eclipse to re-begin your adventure and to dream about the future in new ways and your role in it. Quickly coming to the assistance of that final eclipse will be Neptune moving into Aries on March 30th. Neptune will spend the next more than a decade in Aries after a brief stint back in Pisces in the fall. And Neptune is really bringing a sense of intrigue and mystery to your adventure and expansive house. I think this is going to be a really wonderful transit. There will be some wild goose chases that are a part of it, being misinformed in some ways. Sometimes this can pull you into a cult, but just lean into that Virgo discernment and stay safe. Okay. Virgo risings. I talked about in my year ahead forecast, Virgo risings having the craziest year, all other things being equal in 2025. And a big part of it is everything that happens in March. So we begin March. Mars is now direct in your 11th house, that shakeup of your community, who you thought was on your side, who your team was. We've clarified that a little bit. We might have to do some shadow work in our relationships as symbolized by Venus stationing retrograde in the 8th house of intimacy. Venus in Aries wants what she wants, but if she is not getting it, which is to say, if she is pushing aside the impulses and spontaneity inherent in her nature and denying herself stuff, she may find a level of self-sabotage in relationships, which can either come from putting your needs above those of others in unsustainable ways, or of sacrificing your needs and then experiencing a lot of resentment when other people are not meeting them, even though you have not had the boundaries around that to advocate. Venus stations retrograde on March 1st, and she will be retrograde for the entire month of March, and she will be in Aries in your 8th house, doing the ugly, mucky, transformative work of the 8th house, fighting it out, wrestling it out. If you are struggling, use your body, sweat it out. We will have a South Node lunar eclipse in your 1st house that opens up the Virgo part of the eclipses of the Virgo and Pisces eclipse cycle. This is a really long eclipse cycle, so the last one won't happen until February of 2027, but this is the South Node moving through your 1st house and having lunar eclipses. And that the question of that lunar eclipse is, in what ways are you hindering your own growth? In what ways do you know that there is a truth about yourself and you are nervous about other people seeing it in a way that you are sabotaging your own power? That is the question of that lunar eclipse. And the gift of the South Node moving through your 1st house and the North Node moving through your 7th house is that the South Node is clearing away these old stories about yourself that are no longer helpful. At the same time as that eclipse, the ruler of your chart, the ruler of your 10th house, and the ruler of that lunar eclipse, Mercury, is stationing retrograde in Aries. So again, what is unspoken, what is unsaid, what is uncommunicated, and how do those things need to come to the surface, and how do we need to actually take the time to have those conversations to work things out towards a greater sense of freedom and authenticity for ourselves and in our relationships. Mercury stations retrograde at basically the same point of Venus, which says to me that those topics are connected. And on March 29th, we will have a solar eclipse in Aries at that same place. After gaining those gems of wisdom and the powerful reflections from the retrogrades, really starts this last sense of this new beginning in that area of our lives and how we will move forward with authenticity and honesty, which is part of the key of Aries. Following that eclipse, Neptune changes signs and moves into the 8th house, where it offers both an invitation to the divine, but also an obscure of the earthly and the solid in the space of intimacy. This can be very exciting, but we can also completely misjudge relationships and our power inside of them. So you can use that really good Virgo discernment and take everything with a grain of salt when you are entering into these deep commitments. And that is what I have for you for March. It begins and continues this theme of reevaluating your relationships and your role in them. You paradoxical life people. 25 on the whole, I think, has been a little bit rough for Libra risings because we've had Mars retrograde in your 10th house, some frustration with career, with your life's work. It's moving too slowly. It's not quite the right fit yet. It's taking a lot of effort and energy and stress. And at the same time, you've got the planet of hard work, Saturn, in your 6th house of slogging it. So it just looks like it's been an exhausting year for Libra risings. And then your chart ruler is going to station retrograde in the 7th house, in the place of your relationships. She is reconsidering the role of your relationships, what you do in them, how much you sacrifice for them. And she is trying to clear some of the ambivalences in that area by bringing Venusian themes in there, by asking you to be a little bit more selfish in your needs. So she stations retrograde, and she will be retrograde for all of March, but in Aries itself, in your 7th house for much of March until she retrogrades back into Pisces on March 27th. We will have a South Node lunar eclipse in your 12th house in Virgo. This eclipses in your 12th house can just be that moment where you have a strong reaction to something and you think that you've processed the trauma around something or you've gotten over it, and surprise, you haven't. Or this can even be a mistake that you forgot about that suddenly comes to light, because the 11th house, we don't see coming what happens in there. So there's the kind of nasty surprise of, sorry, not the 11th, the 12th house. The nasty surprise of the 12th house. Need to let go and clear out of some of the stuff that we feel shame about that we have been holding on to, and lean more into how are we creating supportive practices for who we are now. At the same time of that eclipse, we have Mercury stationing retrograde at the same degree that Venus stationed retrograde. So again, right around 10 degrees of Aries. Mercury is the ruler of that eclipse, so is taking what was revealed in that experience and integrating through a retrograde process, which is so much about reflection and rethinking and altering our autopilot thoughts. Mercury in Aries can certainly be on autopilot because Aries moves so swiftly that when it halts, it's more like it crashes and needs to go figure something else out, needs to return to the creative, intuitive soup of Pisces to understand what it missed. We have a second eclipse, which is our final eclipse Solar eclipse in Aries. It is the third of three. We have had one every April for the last 2 years, and we have this one on March 29th, again at around 10 degrees. So this eclipse is the new beginning that is taking its cues from the Venus and Mercury retrograde to begin a new way of being in relationships, a new level of transparency around your needs and desires and communication. Right after that, Neptune enters the 7th house. And this, I don't love Neptune in the 7th house. And the reason for that is that there tends to be a lot of ambiguity around relationships, what relationships actually are, who you are in the relationship, who the other people are in the relationship. Neptune can either hand us the ideal, we've met our perfect mate, or we think we have. And sometimes, the frustrating part is that sometimes it's pretty true. And sometimes we are just completely delusional about that. But nevertheless, intuition becomes really important with Neptune, and we can encounter the divine through wherever Neptune is working in our charts. We believe wholeheartedly in relationships. Some of them will turn out to be false, and we will question ourselves and we will transform in that respect. But if we just lean into the patience of that, there is much wisdom to be had. Okay, Scorpio risings. We begin March. We've had the ruler of your chart retrograde in the sign of its fall in the 9th house for the last 10 weeks. It's finally moving forward again, but still in the sign of its fall until mid-April. So things should ease up a little bit, but still not perfect. We have Venus stationing retrograde on March 1st in your 6th house. She feels frustrated with what your daily life looks like and whether or not that is in accordance with what you believe to be true and good in the world moving forward. She is reconsidering that. If you are denying yourself pleasure and fun and creativity in order to get things done, she is looking for a rebalance of that when she retrogrades back into Pisces on March 27th. On March 13th or 14th, depending on your time zone, we will get the first Virgo eclipse in your 11th house of friends and alliances. This will be a lunar eclipse on the south node. This is asking, in what ways are you not participating in your community around your values? In which ways have you not found your tribe around certain things that you care about? What is missing in your collective participation? And how can we facilitate that? The reflections that come through that eclipse will be channeled into Mercury's retrograde. Mercury stations retrograde a few hours after that eclipse and is the ruler of that Virgo eclipse. Mercury will station retrograde right around the same degree of Venus, which means we are integrating the same stuff, but we're no longer doing it through the heart and our sense of value, but through the mind and through communication. Both planets will come into Cazimi with the sun at the heart of their retrogrades just after the equinox, which means they're both coming into Cazimi in Aries. These sudden realizations of what I have to do, right? Mars signs are about what we do. Mars will be moving forward again, but still struggling how to do that in alignment with our beliefs. We will have our third and final eclipse in Aries, our final solar eclipse, again, right around 9.5 degrees, 9 degrees of Aries. So right around that same degree, which is this fresh new beginning of how you structure your days and your relationship to your body to facilitate your growth and how to make them tolerable and supportive moving forward. Just after that, on March 30th, we have Neptune moving into Aries, and this is the beginning of a more than a decade transit. And Neptune in the sixth house can be a problematic transit. It's certainly not as fun as you've been having with Neptune in Pisces. In the fifth, creative and mystical and magical, Neptune obscures the origins of things, which can be exciting because we can discover the power of God, right? Routines become rituals potentially with Neptune moving through the sixth house, but we can also have mysterious illnesses or symptoms that kind of come out of nowhere and we can't figure out the cause for them. And we can also have our energy really drained with Neptune in the sixth house. It's hard to create boundaries wherever we have Neptune. And so when that's around your physical work and what you're doing, you can just overwork yourself or burn out too quickly. And if you're on the edge of burnout, Neptune entering Aries might be a sign of really hitting burnout and needing to pause and take a step back, which would be mirrored in a solar eclipse being like, hey, we can't do this house the way we used to do this house. It's all in service of the whole. So that's where we are. Okay. Sagittarius risings. Okay, Sag. Not a bad month for you, as some other signs do. We start the month with Venus stationing retrograde in your fifth house. Fun, self-expression, creativity, children. She is moving backwards into the fourth house. This is about the connection between your foundation, where you come from, and then how you express the spontaneous joy or the response to that space. This is about the negotiation between the individual and the collective, right? Aries is I am the spark that comes out of the chaos. I am the individual. I am the beginning of everything. Whereas Pisces holds all of it. I am everything. I'm connected to everything. I'm holding everything. And so Venus is almost figuring out what she wants to bring into the world, what she wants to carry forward from Pisces and what she wants to leave in Pisces. She stations retrograde and goes through that process. She will be in your fifth house asking what really is fun? What is the purpose of fun? How am I exploring? How am I being supported by that? I think that's what I want to say about that. We have the first Virgo eclipse, Virgo lunar eclipse. There will be 3 of them. And it happens at 24 degrees of Virgo in your 10th house of your life's purpose and what your mission is, what you're doing, what you think you're doing. And it's so important for Sagittarius risings that you know why you think you're doing it and what it is in service to. So you might find, as a part of a lunar eclipse on the South Node, that your current work has lost meaning and that you need to re-enter the deep well of yourself and your experiences and your intuition to bring back a sense of faith in your journey. Mercury will station retrograde a few hours after that eclipse. It rules your 10th house. It's stationing retrograde right on top of Venus. It also rules your relationships. These are big structural questions about your life that we see with that Venus retrograde and then the Mercury retrograde and then the eclipse on March 29th will also pull back the veil on that one and reveal and create the opportunity for a new beginning in that area of your life, in the 5th house, in creativity and self-expression and children. Just after that, Neptune enters the 5th. And I think this is a really positive transit. I think Neptune works really well in the 5th house because it's creating a kind of spiritual dimension to the creativity. I also think it's nice to have Neptune leaving your fourth house because there can be a quality when Neptune is in the fourth house of not being able to settle or find your place and feeling like a wanderer on the earth, not really feeling like any place is home and that you've lost it somehow. And I think that is a little bit inherent to Sagittarius risings, being the archetype of the traveler and having their fourth house be Pisces, the wanderer, the unsettled, the foot in other realms, spaces. But I think it should let up a little bit, and even more so when Saturn leaves. So you're off on a new journey of exploration and of opening your mind with Neptune. Here is your March horoscope for Capricorn risings. You are down reworking the foundations of your chart, down in the deepest rooted parts of your chart, the places of familiarity and identity that comes from your grounding in place and lineage and history, a part that can be very private and also very mundane, not in the astrological sense of the word, but in the layperson and sense of the word. This is the busyness of your daily life, the quietude of your home, and it is getting some shifts and some injections of power, right? Pisces in the third house is having a multidimensional view of the topics of the third house, what is familiar to you, your neighborhood, your friends, your siblings, your familiars, your extended family. You've had the ruler of your chart, Saturn, in this place since March of 2023, and you have had Neptune here since 2011. Those transits are rapidly coming to an end. And by the end of May, Saturn will enter your fourth house and begin very intensely reworking topics of home and foundation. These will not be new. This will not be a new thing that has happened because we have had eclipses in your fourth house for the past 2 years as well, and we will encounter the third of three there later on in March. So March really focuses on your home and your community and your connection to that. Now, with Venus stationing retrograde in your fourth house, that might be a feeling of, I need to move, I need to rearrange things. This doesn't really facilitate my home. For Capricorn risings, the fourth house with Aries can have a little bit of the vibe of a base camp. I come and go, and home exists to facilitate my adventures. You can look back 8 years ago to February and March of 2017 and think about what was going on there, especially with regards to location, because you may see some of those themes again with Venus stationing retrograde as she does on March 1st. She will be retrograde until April 12th, and almost the entire month of March, she is within your fourth house. This can also create some fragmentation and some disquietude in your family as Venus, the planet of social cohesion, stations retrograde and begins reworking who is on the same side as you. Aries is very mission driven. And Venus retrograde in Aries can be really seeing the conflict that comes when we are not in alignment with the people around us. So that can be a little bit challenging, especially because that Venus retrograde in Aries is ruled over Mars that has been retrograde in your seventh house, pulling up frustrating conflicts with people around you, maybe your partner, maybe your business partner, maybe your spouse, your best friend, right? Mars has been really asking you to take the reins on things, because Mars being retrograde in Cancer can really be filled with this sense of helplessness. And that can be quite frustrating. So if you're feeling like, oh, I have to do it alone, I have to make decisions alone, where are my teammates? Where is someone to help me pull the weight of this? Then those topics and those feelings might be affecting how you're feeling about where you are living. The next thing that happens in March, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens in March, but the next thing that I'm really paying attention to is the first eclipse in your 9th house. This will be a south node lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo around 24 degrees in your 9th house. And this can really change the way that you look at the world. It is one of those moments, although it can last a period of months, and sometimes it takes a while for the insight to come to us, where your kind of model of functioning of the way that the world works and what you need to do in the world is broken. So sometimes it can be having an expectation about something that is really ends up being very far off from what actually happens. And you think, the way that I was thinking that the world worked is not really how it's happening. How do I need to change my kind of big picture belief system in order to understand what's actually happening here? How do I need to change my plans? Maybe. I think the 9th house can also be the house of the 10-year plan, based on how my spouse is doing, how it feels to live where I live, or where I might want to be otherwise. There is always that. And I think we will be in a long eclipse cycle with this. The final Virgo eclipse doesn't happen until February 2017. It's really paying attention to where are your assumptions about really the basis of reality. Like, how are those doing? And how might you change your plans with regards to that? At the same time, Mercury is going to station retrograde on March 14th. So it's the ruler of that eclipse. The insights of that eclipse are intimately tied in with Mercury's retrograde, is intimately tied in with Venus's retrograde, because Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde at basically the same degree that Venus is and moving backwards into Pisces. And so Mercury is again taking cues from the heart, taking cues from Our Lady, the evening star right now, Venus. She's very beautiful in the sky, so bright, and thinking about how we're going to change the plans. Venus is our desire, what we're attracted to, how we feel connected to people, and that can be in or out of alignment with our thinking and our language and our planning that really all comes through Mercury. This is an interesting dance for Mercury because Mercury in Aries is impulsive and mission driven, and Mercury in Pisces needs to rely on intuition a lot more than Mercury, the cerebral genius, likes to sometimes. So it'll be a lot of creative thinking and kind of fancy footwork. And the best thing is to stay nimble and see what comes through. On March 29th, we will have our final Aries solar eclipse. So your final supercharged new beginning in your 4th house. There may still be some surprises yet in that space. It happens right where Venus and Mercury are stationing retrograde. It'll be really interesting, and I would love to hear if some of you, despite remodeling your house over the last 2 years, decide to move. Because we've had these 3 really supercharged solar eclipses in your 4th house, just signaling kind of new beginning after new beginning in that space. And sometimes that's the way it works. On the heels of that eclipse, Neptune, that is at the very end of Pisces for much of the month, or the entire month, moves into Aries on March 30th and begins a more than a decade transit through that space. Now, this space can be a kind of challenging transit. Neptune moving through the 4th house can fill us with the soul of a wanderer and moving around, searching for something that we feel that we have lost and yet may not have had in this lifetime yet. So it can be this kind of longing for a spiritual home, and that can send us wandering, and we can feel the loss of that really strong, solid fourth house. At the end of May, Saturn will move in there and they will be working sometimes together to build the home that you've dreamed of, and sometimes against each other, taking apart each other's work in that space. And so we just had about 2 years of Saturn and Neptune together in Pisces, and we will have another 2.5 years of them together in Aries. Much remains to be seen of that transit. Aquarius risings. I know you guys like to be up in the ether in your wonderful imaginary minds, connecting with people all over the world through the language of ideas. And there is a funny little space in here where March is really about the connection of your resources in the local community. Your third house has been activated for a couple years, and it continues that activation as Venus stations retrograde. And sometimes that can be a noticing of where you are struggling to find connection in your neighborhood or in your kind of familiar spaces. Venus is looking for a new third space in the third house. Not your home, not your work, but the place that you hang out and interact with your community, be that a coffee shop or, I don't know, your kid's school or the local bar. We're losing some of those. Obviously, for those practicing religion, it can be those spaces as well. So Venus is really maybe feeling the absence of that, questioning how to connect with that, how to find people who have similar enough belief systems that they can really have some fun together. But Venus represents social cohesion. So Venus retrograde in the third house can feel a lack of social cohesion in the community. And sometimes that's realizing, like, I think I might need to be in another place. During this retrograde 8 years ago in February of 2017, I really started seriously thinking about moving out of my hometown and the community that I had become a part of, because I just didn't see a future that really inspired me in that space. Yeah, I'm tracking that storyline, seeing how it shows up. Venus will spend almost all of March retrograde in Aries before she retrogrades back into Pisces on March 27th. But it's really the kind of Venus retrograde April portion that's really the Venus retrograde in Pisces that we'll see. So I'll talk about that at the end of the month. One thing that I do want to note is Venus is stationing at around 10, 11 degrees of Aries, because that will be important as we move forward. On March 13th or 14th, depending on your time zone, we have our lunar eclipse on the south node in the sign of Virgo. This is our first Virgo eclipse in 9 years, when we had Virgo eclipses on the north node. So Virgo eclipses on the south node, I think, are really looking at Aquarius risings becoming more independent and having more faith in their ability to navigate the world and be resourced through the world, despite Pisces in the second house being always a little bit nebulous and always relying a little bit on grace. Virgo eclipses on the south node are looking at how your storyline about obligation, what you feel you owe other people, and what you perhaps subconsciously think that they owe you, and how that is holding you back from really expanding into your full talents and the resources that you have. This is a long journey. We will have multiple lunar eclipses in Virgo. The last one will not be until February of 2027. And it's really striving to rebalance your sense of, where do I take direction for myself? do I act from my power? And where do I offer too much, expect too much, not expect enough, right? How do I negotiate the actual psychological and spiritual and emotional, sexual debts and obligations in my relationships? And where am I self-reliant? And how can I become more so with the North Node in Pisces, wanting to feel more self-reliant? The ruler of your chart, Saturn, is in its last couple months in Pisces. And so this kind of multi-year examination, construction, more intention and effort being devoted to how you set up your finances and how you manage your resources is coming to both kind of a head and an end as Saturn conjoins the North Node. Then Saturn will move into the third house and really put a lot of intention into your communication. And so that is coming up in May, and that will be related, especially for Aquarius risings, because Saturn is the ruler of your chart in traditional astrology. Just after that Virgo South Node eclipse, we have Mercury stationing retrograde at basically the same degree that Venus stationed retrograde. So Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde at about 9.5 degrees of Aries, right on that same point. Mercury rules Virgo, so is the ruler of that lunar eclipse. And so it feels very connected that we have an eclipse in Mercury's sign and then Mercury stations retrograde to integrate what is coming out of that eclipse, of thinking like, oh, okay, I'm going to go back and nearly oppose the degree of that eclipse and check in with the North Node in Pisces and figure out how that is really going to affect me in the year moving forward. Taking some of the insights from the beginning of the Venus retrograde and moving retrograde as well. On March 29th, we will have our final Aries solar eclipse, so the final one in your third house, which has you exploring your connection to your neighbors, to your community, to your friends, to your family. Depending on the other parts of your chart, this can be more or less productive. If you're born with the sun above the horizon in an Aquarius rising chart, that is positive because it means that your chart is ruled by Saturn. That is your sect malefic. So not as problematic as Mars. If you are born with the sun below the horizon, then Mars is your out of sect malefic, the most troubling planet in your chart. And this is an eclipse and 2 retrogrades in a sign that it rules while it's been retrograde in the sign of its fall. So definitely a difficult Mars. So really about wrestling with how do you show up on your own side in your personal power. Sometimes Aquarius risings are carrying the weight of the world being Saturn ruled, or the weight of the future. And that can create a sense of doubt and a kind of analysis paralysis that makes it very hard to take action with Mars. Now, again, that's going to depend on where your Mars is, but sometimes we can see that show up. So this eclipse is giving us that third space to say, okay, what is your ideal environment? How can you make it happen? How can you use the values you've developed with Venus and the creative problem solving of Mercury to make what you want this space to be a reality? And you don't have a vision for that over the next 6 months until the Virgo solar eclipse in September. We will be under the auspices of this eclipse, and Neptune will be moving into Aries to bring a vision to that space, to bring the inspiration and the porousness to be able to receive the creativity and visions from the unconscious or from the divine. Neptune will be done with 14 years in your financial house, making it very difficult to save money, very easy to be in debt, just all in all, very difficult to create a kind of solid foundation in your second house. And I think it's going to be much more positive for Neptune to put our money away and pick up our pens and step into the third house. And we will have more than a decade to experience that as well. Okay. Pisces. Pisces, this month is so much about your personal resources and how they inform your self-expression out in the world. March 1st, Venus stations retrograde at almost 11 degrees of Aries. She is moving backwards into your first house. She is much more empowered in Pisces. She struggles a little bit in Aries because in Aries, she is in some ways forced to be selfish. And in Pisces, she is almost the opposite, right? Selfless, just allowing the flow of creativity to move through her. And obviously, there are problematic pieces with either one of those stances. When Venus is in Mars's sign in Aries, she might break stuff because she is very bullheaded. She's moving forward to what she wants. And so she pauses. She's like, wait, this isn't quite working. Right? There's that old adage, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I feel like that is one of the questions for Pisces risings during this Venus retrograde, and maybe more or less for everyone, but Venus goes fast in Aries alone. So she's leaving things behind. But when we have a retrograde, we have Venus pull in. She's checking in with her intuition. She's going into a period of introversion to re-examine what her values are and if those are in alignment with the connection to the collective that Pisces rising can have. Your ability to take initiative is a strength. And also your ability to understand and to feel the weight of everything and try to absorb everything is also a strength. But how to get those two pieces to negotiate with each other is the challenge of this Venus retrograde and also of the upcoming Mercury retrograde. Mercury entered the shadow of its retrograde on February 28th. We then have a south node lunar eclipse in Virgo at 24 degrees of Virgo in your seventh house. This is the second eclipse in your first and seventh house axis. We had a Pisces eclipse in September, and now we are getting our Virgo eclipse. So we are checking in on how you are doing in your relationships. Where are there stories about the way that things have to go that are getting in your way and limiting your access to experiences that would expand your mind? So that's something that we're looking out for. The South Node lunar eclipse is asking what's missing. What's missing in your relationships? Is there a sense, right? Maybe that is a relationship. Maybe that is, I have all these relationships that don't really feel alive anymore. And I need the sense of juicy hanging out with the divine wonderfulness. And it just isn't there. And right, that is a signal to, okay, we need to clear some space in that area. And that's what the South Node does, is it clears space. And then the North Node brings in more. Are you allowing enough excitement and inspiration or whatever it is that you feel like you're missing? Where is that not coming from you? Where are you not allowing yourself that enjoyment or those feelings? And how do we bring more of you into the space? Because that will also allow other people to be themselves, and then we'll get to experience the gifts that they actually bring us. That eclipse happens on March 13th or 14th, depending on your time zone. And then just after that, the ruler of that eclipse, Mercury, will station retrograde, basically right on top of the same point that Venus stationed retrograde on. Mercury will station retrograde at 9.5 degrees of Aries and move backwards. And so it's almost like the heart feels it. We move forward, we experience this eclipse, and then the mind starts to chew, and the mind starts to process, and the mind starts to try and make sense and piece it all together. From March 14th to March 22nd, 24th, I expect that things will be in chaos. We will be in the first half of the retrograde before the Cazinis with Mercury and Venus. So the social cohesion is falling apart. The communication is falling apart. It's Aries, so we might be doing things really impulsively and making a mess. And we're just going to hang in there. It's going to be fine, right? The world is old. So don't panic. And as with all things Mercury retrograde, do not give in to the urgency. The urgency is an illusion. That's how you really mess things up in that space. They will go Cazimi with the sun on March 22nd and March 24th, so very close together. The sun will be in its exaltation in Aries at that point after the spring equinox. I think it'll be beautiful and empowering. And then on March 29th, we will have our third of 3 solar eclipses in the sign of Aries. So this is the third of 3 supercharged new beginnings in your second house of your personal talents and resources and values and how you let those shine. Just after that, on March 30th, Neptune, that has been in your whole sign first house since 2011, will ingress into Pisces. And there will be, hopefully, an increasing clarity of who you are and all you have become since 2011, when Neptune moved in and helped you change in subtle and nuanced ways that sometimes you couldn't see for a long time, and now have become part of you, less rigid. Yeah, and then Neptune begins its new journey on a mission in Aries in the second house. Saturn is almost done with your first house too. Saturn will leave Pisces for Aries at the end of May, and so that should bring a lot more lightness. We just got to handle the turbulence of everything happening in Aries and Pisces until then. Venus will be back in Pisces in your first house on March 27th, and then we'll have almost an entire other month of Venus in Pisces, and that should soothe things if they are feeling really roughed up during the retrograde. So I hope you hang in there. I'm excited to hang out with you guys for a couple of years with eclipses in your first and 7th houses. I hope you have a good March. As always, for everyone, if you would like me to break these down personally, please book a reading on my website. You can also subscribe to my Substack, where I release some non-video episodes in the interim, and follow for more. And if you know somebody who might enjoy my flavor of astrology, please share my work with them. Okay, thank you so much.